Hi there, and welcome again to this Explaining History Study Extra. As you know, I am a teacher at King's Interhigh. It's an online school, very good one, and if you are interested in learning online, you could do a lot worse than to check them out. And this, by the way, is not paid for. They don't spare a dime. I'm just bigging them up because they're my employers and they're cool guys. Anyway, so I tend to create little recordings from time to time for students that I have, and today this goes out to them, but it also goes out to anybody who's studying history anywhere in the world. With if you're studying the history of the Russian Revolution and the development of the Soviet state. So I'm going to talk about Lenin, his testament, his death, and the last couple of years of his life, and the kind of the consequences in the establishment of a power struggle, which is concluded with the accession of Stalin to supreme power by 1928. So a lot of this is kind of interconnected with the events of the Russian Civil War. Okay, so obviously October 1917 the Bolsheviks come to power, and from 1918 to about 1921-22 there's a civil war, which up until 1920 it's not certain the Bolsheviks will win. Lenin has to bring about extreme policies in order to ensure that victory, one of them being war communism, which is the total control of the economy, the total control of working time and workers' rights, the abolition essentially of any kind of workers' rights that emerged as a result of the Soviets in 1917, and the control of the food system. So it is the first great looting of the peasants. The second one, of course, is collectivization. And when the Civil War ends, and Trotsky, and I paraphrase here, essentially says we won the Civil War, but we had to destroy the country in order to do it. Lenin, by the end of the Civil War, is seriously unwell. He's had a number of strokes. This wasn't helped by the fact that he was shot several times in 1918 by the social revolutionary assassin Fanya Kaplan, and some of the bullets were never fully retrieved from his body. He was very, very lucky to survive. As Lenin grew more and more unwell, and was less and more frail, was less able to engage in political life, it became more difficult to discern what the future held. In 1921, following the Kronstadt uprising, the Antonov Peasants' Revolt, and the workers' the workers' movement within the party, Lenin essentially says that, particularly with the Kronstadt Revolt, that this is a bolt of lightning that has illuminated the entire landscape. We can now see the extent of opposition to us in Russia. We can now see the fact that we will not survive for very much longer unless we have a temporary and strategic withdrawal. There is huge debate over what was meant, what Lenin intended with his next policy, which was obviously the new economic policy. The new economic policy was Lenin's strategic withdrawal. He said we will hold on to the commanding heights of the economy, steelworks, coal mines, railways, the stuff of kind of industrial capitalism, or now industrial revolutionary socialism. But we will allow small-scale profiteering amongst the peasants. They'll be able to keep grain surpluses, which we've been looting from them. And there will be a small degree of free enterprise that small shops, bars, cafes, restaurants, that kind of thing, will be able to proliferate. And Lenin, because he dies in 1924, never specifies how long this was meant to last, and it's kind of speculation we can only speculate how long actually Lenin intended. My sense is that probably he thought in order to rebuild Russia, you would need to allow the NEP to last for a very long time, a matter of decades. The creation of the NEP policy divides the Bolshevik Party. There are those on the left that say this was a war to eradicate capitalism. There are the more pragmatic Bolsheviks that say, well, yeah, but if we rip up all markets and all market mechanisms, the country will survive. The country will starve. It will collapse, and then our very hostile neighbours will simply march in and overthrow the revolution as easy as that. Lenin gives no indication of this, and because he gives no indication of what's meant to happen with the most fundamental issue of the day, i.e. how the economy is meant to function and in whose interest it's meant to function, that gives Stalin an opportunity when he comes to power, or throughout the process of him coming to power by 1928. Stalin essentially answers the question in 1928 of what the future direction of the Soviet economy will be, and he answers that with collectivization and the 5-year plans. But we're not there yet. Lenin made a number of contributions to Stalin's accumulation of power. The first was making Stalin General Secretary of the party. Trotsky often used to kind of deride this as a kind of plodder's job, but it's a job in which Stalin was able to accumulate huge amounts of information and therefore power. He was given the power of appointing party secretaries and party bosses across the country, and therefore he was able to build a gigantic network of supporters based on patronage. He would spend hours in his office with his pipe, going through lists of people to be removed from jobs and going through lists of people to be appointed. And if you imagine what life would have been like in the early 1920s in Russia, the party and party membership is the way you can guarantee access to two things: accommodation, a nice apartment to live in, and food. And at the same time, the thing is, it's always kind of existed in Russia, but networks of patronage emerged based on party membership and party favoritism. If you knew somebody who was the boss in Voronezh or somewhere like that, then you were able to kind of leverage that and get yourself an apartment. Often it might involve the eviction of somebody else. But scarce resources required these party networks. There's a Russian term called blat. If you have blat, it means you have connections and you can leverage those. So Stalin appoints party loyalists across Russia. Noticeably, Trotsky doesn't do this. Trotsky has a small network of people who agree with him, other intellectuals and journalists and party members, but it is as nothing compared to the gigantic network that Stalin creates. So Stalin was very good at building the groundwork for himself to bring about his eventual rise to power. The other thing that Lenin brings about before he dies in 1921 is a ban on factions in the party. Now we know that obviously Russia is a one-party, the Soviet Union is a one-party state, and that the Bolshevik Party, or now the Communist Party, are in charge. However, in earlier conceptions of what a one-party state might look like, many Bolsheviks imagined that there would be in sort of inner party debate, so that the democracy, for want of a better word, would be different voices from within the Bolsheviks putting forward different ideas as to how Russia should develop as a new society. But that would necessitate other parties, potentially counter-revolutionary parties, being banned, because all they will do is try to overthrow you and bring about another bloody civil war. However, by about 1921, the kind of the pressures of the Civil War, Lenin's own personality as a kind of very controlling, very suspicious individual meant that more and more decision making was concentrated in his hands, and his hands alone, taken out of the kind of the debate that happened within the party, or debates that happened within the party, and he would simply make decisions on his own. And when this was objected to, Lenin banned factions and said that if people form factions, which could be as innocuous as two members of the party having a private chat about something or other over in the corner, that they could be expelled from the party. And Stalin uses this later on to expel all sorts of dissenting voices from the party. Getting expelled from the Bolshevik Party, or the Communist Party as it becomes, is a more serious deal than, if one was expelled from a party in a democratic country. Not only do you lose the privileges that come with being in the party, but you also become a figure of suspicion. You become the sort of individual who winds upon the radar of the various various iterations of the secret police, from the Cheka to the OGPU to the NKVD. And those people who were expelled in the 1920s, their name went on a list. And when the Great Terror came around from 1936-37 onwards, they were on the list the first on the list to be arrested, or high up the list to be arrested. So expulsion from the party was a very, very serious business. When Lenin died, Lenin left his political testament. Now, there's an interesting thing that's been written, recently, in the last 10 years, by a historian called Stephen Kotkin, who argues that Lenin's political testament couldn't possibly have been written by him. He was too unwell. In the time period that we imagine it was written or even dictated, Lenin couldn't actually speak. And Stephen Kotkin puts the theory that Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, was probably the person that wrote the political testament. We may never know, but it's an interesting thesis anyway. Most historians go with the idea that it probably was Lenin's political testament. Again, it's difficult to see, how it got to be dictated, but who knows. In it, the members of the existing members of the Politburo are all roundly criticised, and in another podcast we'll look at these individual members. There had originally been 4 kind of key figures during the Civil War who had managed the revolution, which was Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, and Yakov Sverdlov, and Sverdlov dies during the Civil War. But by 1924, you have obviously Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Bukharin. Everybody is roundly criticised in Lenin's political testament, but none more so than Stalin. When the members of the Politburo look at the political testament following Lenin's death, they choose to bury it. They choose not to publish it. And when they do this plays into Stalin's hands. Everybody in it would have been discredited to some degree, but Stalin would have been politically finished by what Lenin has to say. And one of Stalin's key claims is that he was the inheritor of Lenin's wisdom. Lenin, who has been raised to a kind of almost cult-like figure in Russia, who is mourned by thousands who after he dies, being seen to be the inheritor of the Leninist tradition is very, very important. And for Stalin to have been directly criticised by Lenin, who calls him sort of ignorant and uncouth and not suitable to wield power in Russia. Stalin had been very rude and abusive to Lenin's wife, to Nadezhda Krupskaya, which is perhaps where Lenin had misgivings about him. For this to have been made public would have been catastrophic. When Lenin died, his state funeral was held, and Trotsky doesn't make the funeral. There are all sorts of theories about this. One is that Stalin told him the wrong day, which to me seems fanciful. Someone like Leon Trotsky, who successfully managed most of the war effort of the Bolshevik armies, to be caught out like that and not to check things seems to be unrealistic. The historian Orlando Figers, in his book Russia, a People's Tragedy, which as a kind of an overview of the Russian Revolution is always a good reader, he argues that Trotsky, perhaps unconsciously, maybe was showing that he wasn't interested in power itself. Leon Trotsky was a really professional revolutionary. He was somebody who advocated to the rest of to Russia, to the Communist Party, and to the rest of Russia, that the future direction of the Russian Revolution was to spread itself, to have what Trotsky called permanent revolution. Trotsky was less comfortable settling down as a government minister or even a future leader of Russia, and wanted to be involved in permanent revolution. This perhaps explains why he is kind of almost self-sabotages in this way and doesn't turn up to Lenin's funeral. This is considered to be an act of gross disrespect and something that Stalin uses against Trotsky. We'll look at the battle between Stalin and Trotsky perhaps another time. The other way of thinking about the difference between Stalin and Trotsky is this question of permanent revolution, which Trotsky advocates, versus what Stalin suggests is socialism in one country. And again, this is how Stalin breaks away from the rest of the party and presents a vision of what the Soviet Union could be like. There's this insecurity and this lack of clarity about where the Soviet Union is going, and Stalin says, here's what we should do. Socialism in one country involves the building of socialism. In sort of Marxist dialectics, the idea is once a socialist revolution happens, you have a long period of kind of hard work and struggle, and the communist promised land is somewhere over the horizon, where you live in this kind of abundant utopia. But Stalin said, we've got to go through the long period of building up industry in the Soviet Union, and particularly for defence, because the counter-revolutionaries, they will come for us eventually. They've tried it a couple of times. They will come for us eventually, and they will be there to kind of put down the revolution. And later on in the 1930s, Stalin's explanation for who Hitler is, really, he says that Hitler is the kind of counter-revolutionary attack dog of the capitalist classes, which is kind of a misunderstanding of Hitler. Stalin doesn't believe in permanent revolution and thinks that Russia's in no shape to be spreading itself revolutionary-wise. And also, after the Russian Revolution, there is a wave of possible kind of halfway house revolutions in Russia, in places like Hungary and Germany, and they don't succeed. By the early 1920s, it's clear that revolutionary socialism is not going to spread from Russia, and so instead, defending the country, building up large armies and heavy war industries is Stalin's solution. And this is what wins out in the end in the power struggle. Okay, I hope you found that useful, and I'll be doing another regular podcast later today. So thanks, all the best, and take good care. Bye-bye.